I feel like this is really loud for a small room. Assuming you guys can hear me, right? Good. Am I good? All right. All right, well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to AU 2017. We have a feverish pace to go through for the next 60 minutes. We have a ton of quick tips for you guys. We're going to do quick introductions. My name is Jamie Scherer. I work on the Fusion customer success team. Our team is responsible for helping our new customers adopt and start to use Fusion 360. So if you've been on any of the webinars for Fusion in probably the last 18 months, it's coming from our team. If you've been to the new adoption portal, we're developing a lot of that content and helping new customers as much as we can.
Yes, and I am Bryce Siebenthal. I'm part of the technical marketing team. Whoa. And so I make a lot of the videos and assets that you probably see all over the website and everywhere. There's a couple of us on our team that just build quick tips. We're in charge of those as well, so keep watching those.
Yeah. Patrick Cranesbury. I work on the Fusion business development team. I've been working with the partner program for a while, and in my spare time, I like to dabble with some Fusion tips.
Dabble with stuff. So we went and had our photos done. We thought we were the keynote because we saw the time frame. So we thank everyone for being in this session, and I think we have 1 million people online that are watching us on live stream, so that's awesome. So here's our agenda. We're going to go through some tips, we're going to go through some tricks, and we got more tips. And for all of the things that Bryce and I don't have tips for, Patrick is hard-coded through API to help you guys out. So we're just going to run through some of these as quick as we can. This will be some light stretching. So for some of the folks in the room that are longtime Fusion users, will consider this just our warm-up. So if you're not familiar today, does everyone know the S key in Fusion? If you're not using the S key, then I've maybe just made you 1,000% more productive. So in Fusion, the shortcut toolbox, just hit S on the keyboard, opens up a contextual search toolbox based on the workspace that you're in, right? So pretty simple. If you're looking for something like fillet, start typing, find the ones that you want, and then you can pin them to this toolbox, and then they're here for you later, right? So if you're not using the S key today, you should be. You're welcome. All right, next one. Local save. So if you're not familiar, of course, Fusion is cloud-based, right? Cloud-enabled. Every time you save, it's being added to your Fusion project. If you want to update or create a local save, it's a crazy kind of keyboard shortcut. Command-Shift-S, or if you're on a PC, it's Control-Shift-S. This will just save the local cache file, right? So if you're the type of person that likes to save every 3 minutes and you don't want to have 400 versions at the end of the day, Command-Shift-S, it'll save the local cache. Of course, if you were to exit out of Fusion, it's there for you. You have that updated, and you don't have 1,000 versions up in the cloud. This one, people don't always get right away, so we're going to do it quick. Double-click middle mouse. You're welcome. Make sure you do it when you go home. That's how you zoom fit, right? So if you're just looking to, zoom all, double-click middle mouse, and it'll do that for you pretty easily. Switch active documents. So I know a lot of people like doing this like in Windows, right? If you want to be able to switch between the active files that you have open. In Fusion, it's Command and the tilde on the keyboard, right? And that will just rifle through the open files that you have open, right? So if you're jumping back and forth between files, it's helpful, right? A quick way to jump back and forth between some open documents. Control tilde or Command tilde on the Mac. This one I added literally 2 minutes before we started because I just learned it. So if this helps you, it helped me, thanks to these guys. They just showed me. So I am one person that is really bad. I have a lot of bad habits. One of them is jumping in through the data panel, getting deep into several folders, and hitting the arrow in the top right corner, which takes you to the root of all of your projects, right? If you use Fusion, and you say you haven't done this once before on accident, you're lying. So if you hit that arrow, it takes you all the way back to the top, right? The root of your project, not the previous folder. But when you do that, so I'll do it again. If you mistakenly, I want to go up a folder, right? The previous folder that I just clicked through, and I accidentally leave the data panel, go to the top of the data panel, you can hit this back button, which I refer to now as Back to the Future, and it'll take you back to the recent project that you're in and the folder that you were in. Bryce and Patrick just saved my life a couple minutes beforehand, so I figured I would add it. Couple more quick ones. So selecting through, and selecting parent, face, body, entities, etc. So we'll just do this one really quickly. So if you're in Fusion, I know this is something that new users struggle with all the time. So let's say I want to select, and this might be when I'm creating a joint, or it could be just for any reason. I want to make a selection of, let's say, the underside of this little component, right? And I can rotate around all day long and grab these, but really all you have to do is click and hold. So if you left mouse and hold, it gives you a selection or select through dialog. And then you can click through all of the faces that are within that scope that you clicked and grab the appropriate face that you were looking for. The other thing that you can do is, if same thing, left click and hold, you can go to the parents dialog, which will let you select, did you want to pick a face? Did you want to select the base feature that was created from? Do you want to grab the whole body, the component, or the entire design that's within, right? So just an easy way to jump between different selection filters inside of Fusion. And one more to build on that. This is a really quick one. We'll jump right back into the same model. So if I want to decide between selecting the body or a component, if you single click on a entity in Fusion 360, you'll see, if you look in the tree, we'll make some space here, it is body number 1, right, which is the body that I clicked on. But if you double click, it actually grabs the the component, right? So we'll do that again so I don't mix words. So single click grabs the body, double click grabs the component, right? So you'll see it grabbed the large spur gear as opposed to body 1, which is the that component, right? So just a simple single click, double click, it'll hopefully save you some time from digging through your browser, finding the bodies or components that you're looking for. And of course, the easy way to do that is when you're clicking on it, I might hide it. Oops, let me go back to that. Now, one thing that I know new users, myself as well, struggle with is you'll notice with this large spur gear that I had open, it's visible, the component, but the body is turned off, right? This can get confusing, right? You can start to lose track of even doing something like show all components. Won't turn that body back on, right? Because it's a body inside of a component. The component is turned on. So when that happens, we have a solution for you.
There's an app for that.
There's an app for that Patrick finds all the things that he doesn't like and fixes them in Fusion in a couple of minutes with API. So Patrick,
more than a couple minutes, but that's okay. All right, so I'm going to show the first. All of my stuff I'm going to show today are all just various little utilities that I've written over the last couple of years, and they're all on my GitHub site, and we'll have the link up in a second. This one seems to be so I call it Show Hidden and Display Utilities, I think is the name of it, and it's just a bunch of like quick little things here that go into the drop. So you can say, for example, show all bodies. And it will just show every body, no matter if it's nested deep down into the component structure, so you don't have to find it. And then the one that I particularly like, I call is show hidden bodies. And so what this is that so you have some model open, it has hidden bodies that could be deep within the structure, and then what you do is you say show hidden bodies, and it inverts the display. And so now you're just seeing the bodies that were hidden, and so then now you can do something like, grab these. Right, and then, let's do this. Grab these, hide them now, and then say show hidden bodies again, and then now you're like back in the state where things you wanted shown. And it also has the same capability for components and construction planes is another one that sometimes is like very difficult to figure out where that one construction plane you wanted was deep in a structure. And also to just hide them all, which is nice too.
Hoot and holler if you like it. Silent.
Please.
Yeah.
When you're doing the API stuff, could you write keyboard shortcuts to allow
It's not exposed. No, I know.
Wrong answer. Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. The question was, could I have written it such that it was hooked up to keyboard shortcuts? And the answer is no.
Oh, that feature? Why not?
It's just not exposed. There's no event listener for keys. I know. It's on we'll talk about it later.
But jump on the idea station and request those.
Request exposing key events in the API.
Yes.
If you don't have those three little icons in the lower right, is there
Oh, this.
This is all API.
So this is an add-in, it's a plugin. Yes, sorry, I should have been more clear about that. Yeah, so we'll give you the links to download these little utilities. So these are little utility plugins that you install through the add-ins thing, and then you'll see it here in this list. It's called display utilities or something.
Holy moly, you have a lot.
Yeah, some of them are half-baked. You can get a preview of next year's tips and tricks session by looking at that list.
I've never seen that many. All right, so let's switch it up. Those were some general tips. Now we're going to get into the building blocks. Every sketch, unless you're just T-splinings or using primitives everywhere, which is too hard. So let me go ahead and jump into Fusion. I'm going to start slow and work my way through it. I'm just going to start with a line tool, and the first one's pretty straightforward. I'm going to continue, and you'll see that it's going to keep adding these lines. It kind of gets hectic sometimes, and if you actually click and hold while coming out of this, you get a tangent arc. So the click and hold, you don't have to go back and activate the tangent arc command. And then if you come out with a line again, you'll see this tiny little blue, can you see on the screen? Blue little symbol. I don't even know what it is, with a circle with a line in it, I believe. That's actually going to create another tangent constraint if you're just trying to chain all these together. And then this little bane of my existence, this green checkbox. I always click it accidentally. It actually ends the line. I use a couple different tricks, though. So what I want to do in this case is I want to draw a line. I'm going to end the line in this case, but I don't want to continue, but I still want to stay in the line command. So I'm going to double click, and you'll see I'm still in the line command, but I'm not chaining those out through one after another. Usually you're doing the game where you click, hit escape, go back to the line command. You always could right click and drag up, but I love that double click. We call it create and continue. So double click, and you can keep going. So there's a big one there. Let me stop this sketch and hide it, and we'll turn on another sketch. This one, I always forget that it's a part of the sketch tools, but let's jump in here. So I'm going to just activate the line command again. So again, I use my S key. Jamie was saying probably 100% of the time. If I touch these top bars, it's because I'm still searching for everything too, so I don't even ever come up here. But first, I want to come and I want to make a line perpendicular to this box. So usually you'd maybe like draw a line, get perpendicular. If it's off the XY, or in this case a ZY, it wouldn't get perpendicular. But if you click and hold, you'll see it actually is going to be perpendicular to that line. And it actually works in a couple different cases. So if I click and hold here, you'll see that same behavior. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So if you click on hold in a circle, what do you think is going to happen? Anybody got a guess? It's coming. Sort of right. It's tangent when you're not at the 0, 90, 180. But if you go to like the 0, 90, 180 or 270 to do it, it comes out perpendicular to that circle. So the two behaviors, it's kind of hard to notice. So if I start at like one of the quadrants, it'll come out perpendicular. Anywhere else, it comes out tangent. Just quick ways to keep doing lines and save you from having to do extra relationships. Stop that sketch and jump to another one. And that's the double middle mouse click that Jamie showed earlier. Ooh, scared the crap out of me. Woo.
You were supposed to be talking to this.
I am.
Oh. Sorry.
Oh.
Continue.
Yes. So the next one, what I want to do is make constraints here. They have this huge list of constraints over here. I have a tough time reading them. And especially if you notice, they actually filter slightly gray. I can't see it very well when you select things. My favorite thing when I'm making constraints, I basically always do this, is I select my entities, right-click, and then you get a filtered list right in the right-click menu. I basically do that all the time. Uh-oh, that is not the constraint I wanted. But we have an undo, if you guys haven't found that yet, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, probably. And then we'll just make that one vertical. Boom. So this next one kind of drove me nuts for years. What I really want to do is draw this circle over this line. I want it to line up right in the middle. We would call this like a midpoint constraint, but there's no point here. So I would have to like create an extra line or do some point. Not quite. So what's going to happen is you have to start by turning on the constraint. Fusion's one of the only tools that I know that actually, once you activate the constraint, it's kind of locked on. So what you can do is like quickly make all these horizontal because it's stuck. So I click one, click the next, click one, click the next, and I just make a bunch of horizontal constraints. It's great for horizontal, equal. If you want to make a bunch of things parallel or concentric, great method for that. But now I want this circle right here to line up right in the middle. So what you have to do is activate the constraint first again, click your point, and you're like, just hover around for a while, just try to find that midpoint. It's not happening. Magic hotkey, hold shift, and then you'll get that little triangle come up, and that's that midpoint. So now this was locked in there, so if I make this any bigger, you'll see it always follows. Shift is that magic key. All right, so now let's keep dimensioning this though. So I want to come and let's turn the dimension key on. Dimension tool, excuse me. And I actually don't want to drive this circle that we have from the center point. I don't know what the diameter of the circle is. I'm not good at math to figure it out. And I really want this to be 10 millimeters from this edge, this hole that we're creating. So normally you'd have to do a lot of math. I'm not great at it. So in this case, if you actually right-click, you can start doing tangent dimensions. So it's on the right-click, and now you could see it picks up points here. So I could come and click on that point, and now we have our 10 millimeters. And it actually works. This is a little bit tricky, so I want to go circle to circle. Just remember, you have to right-click first, click it, then right-click again. Oh, it locks on, sorry. And, whoa, turned on something. So right-click first, click that guy, and then come over here and select this guy, and now we have tangent from circle to circle. And you could go from max condition, min conditions, min to max, whatever, you could get fancy with it. All right. This next one is one of my favorites, actually. So I like to create a lot of construction geometry. It drives me a little bit nuts when I get too many regions, just because you have to, like, when you start extruding and stuff, you get all these different profiles that you want to do. And I use construction geometries for who know what, symmetry, weird things just to reference. So what usually I would be doing is create the square and then go back, and if you didn't know, the hotkey's X to make a construction, so I'd go back and make that X, or turning it on and off over here. But what I really want to do is create that square first with construction. So you would turn on the construction tool, and then you could use whatever sketch tool you want. And we call it forward create construction. So now I could use the line tool if I wanted to. I'm still in this construction mode. Do remember you have to turn it off. So you could see that now I could make a bunch of construction lines. So just remember to use that to turn it on and off. Yeah, so the construction line is you just, in the sketch palette, there's a construction box. Once you turn it on, all the sketch tools you use will now be construction geometry. Yeah, do it before. Or you could do it after. We give you the flexibility to go either way. All right. So this one's just a quick one that actually works throughout most workspaces, and I use it for simulation, is just some of my favorite selection tools. So if you didn't know, right here we have a big select button with a whole slew of selection tools. Take a look at them. My favorites are invert selection, select by size. But just to select sketches, by default you're on this Windows select, where left to right it selects inside that box, and right to left it's whatever's touching that box. So left to right, that entity has to be entirely in that box, and then right to left it just has to be touching the box. Same thing goes for a couple different other ones we're going to see here in a second. So if you go down to select, it's also the 2 key, the freeform, and if you can make this whatever you want to do. I like to redline markup with this in Sketch if someone's watching. But if same exact type of thing, if you go left to right, it has to be inside that box, or right to left. I always get this one backwards. Counterclockwise? No, that's weird. Can't even get it to work. There it is. So it is right to left. Yeah, and then it just touching that box. You see it got both of them. All right, let's switch real quick. Last couple ones for Sketch. This one is one of my favorite ones. Let's jump in here. And I want to create a sketch for some holes here. So what happens is I want to bring my circle in, and especially for new users, you get all these blue lines. You see like these blue lines that I'm picking up in the background. those are just things way out in, I don't even know, no man's land. So if you actually just start clicking, you'll see that, like, I just made two coincident, I fully defined that accidentally to something random. So the magic hotkey, which is if you hold your Command in Mac or Control in Windows, we just need a simpler way to say that eventually, but Command on Mac, Control on Windows, it turns off those auto projections. So you can just click and you don't have to worry about picking up those or have to go back and delete them later. Let me just create a circular pattern real quick. Object, let's get the point. Say I want 4 of these guys. Just circular pattern of circles. One thing that design change came, now they want 6 holes. Usually I would probably go back and like delete those. For sketching, if you do any patterning, there's actually a feature here, or sorry, a constraint here essentially, that you can edit, and you could jump right back in and change that to 6 if you needed to. So just there's that little constraint right there. It gets a little bit hectic, especially when you have like a ton of patterns to find which one's which, but you could edit those patterns. And finally, before I throw it off to some modeling fun, let's go ahead and create a sketch here. This is a common one, especially when you're like designing internal parts. Now I'm like designing inside this part, and I always have issues like clicking on things, especially when you go to extrude or something, you like select this top face, and I really want that profile there. There's actually a button over here called Slice, and what it does is like a section view at that time, and it brings you down here so I could keep on sketching. Maybe I wanted to add some circles around that one, and now I could use that. And Slice you can turn on and off globally from here, as well as you can select the sketch and you have the same slice sketch. So if you have tons of sketches in the middle somewhere, you could select different sketches, slice them, and kind of interrogate the model that way as well. But I'm a big fan of using the slice out of the sketch palette. With that, we're going to switch it over to some modeling.
All right. Sorry for
If you guys have questions, shout them out. If it's a really long one, we'll be around all week, so we can.
And when you see something awesome,
Yeah.
clap. 'Cause
High five each other. Come up here and high five me.
Jamie
if you
really
want.
likes.
It
needs
makes me,
the
it really makes this better for me. Just not for you,
ego.
but for me.
It's really better for us if you clap a lot. Yeah.
Exactly. So I've got 2 more quick ones in model. Again, some light stretching. First, 2 with joints. So if you wanted to first select, I'm going to build this reciprocating saw, right? So I want to create a relationship between this crank arm and the component that drives the blade out in the front. So what I want to do in this case, I'm going to create a joint. If you're not familiar with joints, we're not going to talk a lot about them today, but we can talk offline. We have some materials that'll help. What I want to do is talk about how we lock in on a selection when you're using a joint, right? So I think this is probably hopefully not new for everybody. But so for instance, I want to actually select the middle of this, this slot, right, or this hole. And you can see as I kind of drag down and move my mouse off, it's grabbing the next selection, right? It's grabbing an edge, it's grabbing a face, it's kind of quickly moving through any number of selections. If you hold Command, it will lock in on the selection that you have, and now I can just kind of rifle through the top of the hole, the center of the hole, which is empty space, right? So it's not easy to grab, and then the bottom. So again, not holding it, you kind of will pick up anything that your mouse moves on. If you're really anxious like me and you're moving your mouse all over, you'll see that. But if you just hold Command, it will lock on that selection. And then no matter where you bring your mouse, it's still locked on that. So we're going to create a joint. In this case, I'll create one between this selection. And now what I want is to grab, again, empty space. I want to join the center of the blade rod connector to the center of this crank arm, right? And I don't really have a good way to grab that. So the way that you do it in Fusion, simple right click, say between 2 faces. This will give you the ability to say first face is the bottom, second face is the top, and then you just have to locate the joint origin. So you'll see when I select, maybe the center of those bushings, it'll grab that empty space or that middle and then bring them together for me, right? So, okay, thank you, John. That's it. It's a good one. It's a really helpful one, and ultimately helps you build better assemblies really quickly by using that between 2 face option.
Actually going to create a joint origin between two faces where you can manipulate the coin itself. Is it the same functionality, just faster?
It is. The difference, so what John is referring to is you can create a joint origin. One thing that I was going to add but didn't, joint origin is a good instance if you wanted to create a joint between two components, right? Between two faces only works within the same component. If you wanted to grab space that was between two separate components, a joint origin would be a good way to do that.
It's actually doing that fine.
Yeah, that's essentially what it's doing. But in that case, if they're not the same component, then you would want to create a joint origin. All right, next. So the other one that I want to show really quickly, and hopefully this will be helpful for some of you. If you're frequently importing geometry, it might be geometry from any CAD system out there. If you're machining parts or bringing in someone else's geometry, you might need to make changes, right? And hopefully everyone's aware by now, Fusion is incredibly powerful at direct modeling, but sometimes it just can't solve the geometry, right? So you'll see, like in this instance over here, I've got like some weird fillets. Maybe I don't want them. I want to change the fillet. I want it to be one, one continuous fillet as opposed to these kind of two. And I have some bad faces here. So the simple thing to do in Fusion would be to delete them, right? Grab these faces, hit delete. Most of the time, Fusion will say, no problem, I'll remove it. But in this case, it gave me a warning, right? It said that it couldn't solve that geometry. And it might be for any number of reasons. It could be the geometry. Probably in this case, it can't quite solve what's going on in the corner with these fillets. Awesome method that Brad Tallis on our team has been showing everyone. He calls it the wound and heal method, right? So what I'm going to do is wound the geometry, right? I'm going to create a plane along a path, put it all the way at the end. And then I'm just going to use something simple like a primitive. So we'll just use a sphere on that plane, located anywhere. Basically, I'm just kind of taking an ice cream scooper and removing out that geometry, right? It's bad geometry. I don't want it. We're going to cut that out. I'll do the same thing on the other side. So we'll say plane along path, right? I'm just kind of locating this really quickly.
The ice cream scooper?
The ice cream scooper? Is that not a thing? People don't use ice cream scoopers? So here we go. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. In this case, I'm just trying to remove that geometry. I don't want to go too far because now I'm actually cutting through the back of the part, so just be careful. But in this case, as long as I kind of fully encompass the geometry that I don't want there, now if I grab these faces and hit delete, Fusion solves it right away, right? So it's able to figure that out. Now all I have to do is delete the ice cream scoops that I don't want. Fusion will solve that, right? So now it's able to kind of compute the geometry because I removed it from the selection. Woo! Thank you for that. Yeah, ow! And then put in a continuous fillet or whatever I wanted to do, right? So a great way to defeature and work with parts. So review, lock on joint locations with control or command between two faces we talked about, wound and heal. And Patrick, I think it's on you.
Oh man, it's already on me?
Some parameters.
All right. So this one is just a tip. So am I up? Yeah. Okay. So I was just going to talk about a couple things in parameters real quick, which will lead into the next little section. One of the things that I think is really powerful in Fusion, is really useful, is using these user parameters and dimensions in your models. So when you're in a model, so I've got this really simple model we use as an example, and modify, change parameters. This lets you access a couple of things. One is you can actually display it'll show you every single dimension of every single feature in this list. You can say sketch 1, you can see that in the first sketch I've got 2 dimensions. In the extrude I've got the depth, and then the thickness I've got this thickness. And the other thing you can do here that's pretty useful sometimes is you can actually rename these sometimes, useful. Although in a lot of cases what I prefer is you can actually create user parameters. So you can just say I want to create a parameter called thickness and make it equal to 0.25 or something. And then you can reference that in here. So in the value, I could either edit this and say I want to change the shell thickness to be 0.5 or something. Not 0.5, but 0.5, and then it'll update. Or I could say now I just want to make this actually equal to thickness, and it'll tell me that it's evaluating to 0.25. So you can do a lot more in here. One of the things that I think trips people up a lot that I wanted to hit in here for the tip was everything in Fusion is always resolving to a unit. When I create a parameter, I could create a parameter called, say, height _ centimeters, and I could change it to be centimeters. And you can only do this when you're creating it. Is the only time you can change the unit. The units are set forever. And I could even say I want it to equal the height, for example. And then it'll evaluate now in inches. But so units always have to be resolved. And the point of that is that, so if I want to do something like, if for whatever reason I wanted this to not be length, I wanted it to be like length times width. This one I see in the forums a lot. Somebody will be trying to do something like this, and then you can't figure out why it's not solving, and it's because it's saying this is resolving to inches squared, you know? And so the solution to that, which you'll find very useful in a lot of cases if you try to do these more complex expressions, is to then just say divided by 1 inch, and then it'll resolve. Because now you're like, the solution is in inches. There's also some other things that you can do in here that are kind of fun, like you can do, which is also, it's kind of hidden, you have to sort of know it, is you can do, there's a bunch of math expressions in here, like floor, round, sine, things like that. So I could do like, I want to do the floor of height, and it would just like round it down to the next integer, things like that.
Who would have thought you would have got a math class today, guys?
Oh, this is just the tee up for the big math is coming next. Anyway, so that's,
yeah.
Where are the list of those?
It,
it's right here on my slide.
yeah, if you just search,
It's in model, modify, change parameter. It's in the change parameter dialog box help article. So now I need to get this thing back to being normal so that I can work. All right, okay, so that's fun. Next one is, so Helix. So custom threads and helical curves. I'm now going to be deviating from functions that are in Fusion. Is common request. And I've got a couple of fun little tips on this one too. So let me go create a new part. And again, another add-in you can download from my thing. So once you've installed this Helix plugin, now I have a little dialog box for you here called Helix, and then you can just pick a plane to start it on, and it's just going to go off the origin, and then it's just some basic parameters in here, like the number of revolutions and the pitch, and then you could also set, because it's just interpolating, so I'm just going to set some tolerance, basically how many points, and now I've got a Helix, and then so that's fun. And then I wanted to show this really cool tip that a customer actually showed me the other day, or fairly recently, that I thought was an amazing way to do this. Because if you're going to do a custom thread pitch, you know, typically you really, a lot of times you want to actually have like a curve to sweep on and a guide curve. So to create the guide curve, this is a nice little tip, which is to just take, you can take any curve in Fusion, even if it's a complete 3D curve like this. So this is obviously it's a helical curve. You can do a surface, go to the patch, and do an extrude, and you can actually just extrude the 3D curve up.
Isn't that magic?
That is magic. That blew my mind.
Works.
He's like, oh yeah, that's how I do that. What? That's amazing. And then of course you could just go back in here into create a sketch and do something real simple like create a, you know, some little profile, and then we could sweep it. And so I'm going to say I want to do path and guide rail, and so then the profile will be this, and then the path and guide rail. And then I would have now, you know, obviously I could have made this a much more complex section, but then you get the custom springs, threads, whatever it is that you want to do. That's a fun one. All right, now this one's real fun. So for those of you guys who like to mess around with parameters and sizes, and if you've ever used any other software with things like configurations in it,
this is debut
hot off
today,
the
guys.
presses, making its formal release in the Fusion Tips and Tricks session right now, is a little project I've been working on that I call Sheeter, and it's my trademark.
It's gonna get ripped off one day.
And what this lets you do is, so I've got a model, and in this case I've got this model is all hooked up to a whole bunch of user parameters. And what this plugin will do is let you hook the design up to Google Sheets. And so I'm going to say I want to link this design to a Google Sheet. I've already got one created for this, but you would say, I want to create a new sheet, and do you want to put all of the parameters? So remember I showed you could have every single dimension, or do you want to just put in there the user parameters? So I think if you're doing something that's going to be like heavily automated like this, I recommend making a bunch of user parameters and then just driving those and having everything else referenced to them. It's better. And then once you do that, you will have something that looks like this. So the first time you click through it, it'll ask you to authenticate and allow it to run. And then you'll see, it'll create a sheet for you like this that has 3 tabs. So on the BOM tab, you can basically just use that as like a quick way to edit things like the description and the part number. These other fields are just automatic. Or if you want more significant BOM editing capabilities, Jesse Bomber in the audience. By the way, Jesse is one of the main reasons that I know how to do all this stuff in the API. He taught me how to do it, a lot of this stuff.
You're the one.
And Brian Eakins, if he's in here. The other one is parameters. This is the real meat, right? So these are all the user parameters that I had in there. And then what I've already done is added a couple of rows. But what I can do is just add more rows. So if I want to have some other size with some other part number, I'll call this one new size. And it could be, say, we'll give it some new values. The thing about this is that it's full Google Sheets, right? So like you could put all the logic, lookups, references out to other systems. Anything you want in Google Sheets is just Google Sheets, right? So like in this case, I have the shelf. I thought I had the shelf on a mat little thing. But I mean, you could write some little equation in here, like an if statements, whatever you want. And then what the little add-in will do is you can say either just sync, where you can either push changes, pull changes, or you can say change size. And I think I still had some debug stuff in there. Now, like, it's showing me the different sizes from the Google Sheet, and I can switch between them. I forgot to turn off my little debug messages to myself. I got to remember to do that. But anyway, so there's that. And then I won't go through all the rest of it, but you can. I've made a more extensive video on this one, but it'll also let you, if you've got a bunch of sizes for something like this, where you have like a part and you've already created toolpaths for it. So I've got a bunch of setups and toolpaths already created for this one. And then, in Sheeter, you can do 3 things. You can either have it generate G-code for all the sizes, and then you just sort of pick, do you want to do setups or folders, and you pick which ones you want to do. So say I want to do these 2 setups, which post do you want to use, and where do you want to output it, and then it'll just like, compute each size, regenerate the toolpaths, and then export the NC files. And then the other 2 things it'll do is either generate a Fusion design for each size, so you could have like a new Fusion design in the project, or you can have it export a step file or an IGES file or STL file or something for every size. So that's fun. I feel like that one's going to get some
Traction.
downloads.
Yeah, definitely go try that. That's basically configurations.
No, it's not. Sheeter. It's so much better. And then I have one more, right? So I made that one we're like, oh my God, it's already 11:09. All right, I'm not even going to demo this one. This one I call Bolter. Yeah. And you can download it, but it's running right here in a little GIF. And basically what this one lets you do is pick a bunch of faces. So you can pick all the tops. You pick the tops that you want to search and the bottoms that you want to search to find matches. And then it'll iterate through all the faces, and it'll find all of the hole stacks and then populate them with a bolt, washer, nut, sized appropriately. And then you manage all the sizes from a Google Sheet. And so it's like a little Google Sheet database thingy. The setup is non-trivial. Yeah, I give you a couple samples right now. I need to work a little bit on the setup, but it's pretty doable to set it up. And you just build out your own models. I'll give you a cap screw and a hex bolt to start with.
Are they even faster part numbers?
These are just I don't know, I just like auto-filled the column. I actually was thinking I'm gonna explicitly not do it with the McMaster stuff so they don't get mad at me or something, I don't know. You know? You can feel free to make publicly available, so you could point at someone else's Google Sheet as well. And you could also point multiple parts at the same Google Sheet. If you've ever thought about wanting to do something like global variables across multiple designs, you could do that with Sheeter. That's it, I'm out.
Magic. All right, so now we're going to switch over to some of the new stuff that was added over the summer. Some sheet metal. Has anybody got to try some sheet metal? There's several classes. We're going to do some more of the stuff you probably, not the basics you would need to go, but I would definitely recommend seeing some of the classes while you're here. So we have a part here that we're going to be designing, and the first thing is you just hop in the sheet metal workspace. There is some switching back and forth between sheet metal and model in this little quick tip session I'm going to be showing. So first is, what I want to do is bring this flange. I'm going to create a flange, and I want it to match this profile here. So let's just use the flange tool. We only have one flange tool, so it's not too hard to figure out what's going on. Sorry about that. So in this case, I want it to go up, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. They're actually just going to weld this, so we just need to get it close so we get a good flat pattern for this. And if you actually look, what's going to happen, though, Fusion automatically is going to combine these two flanges. Yeah, that's great. Once you hit OK and you try to flatten this, it's just going to error out and be like, no, you're not doing that. You get a little error. So this is usually bad when you go to flat. So I have a couple tricks. In the short term. We have a couple ideas to solve this in the long term, but today what I would do is kind of do that same method, do the flange, drag that around, kind of eyeball it up to something, and then I type in 0.1 just to make a tiny little flange. That's perfect here. And I have a couple different things. So Fusion has different types of solvers, parametric direct, surface, a ton of different ones. So I'll show you two different ways we could do this, and I'll show you bads and goods about both. So this first one, I want to drive it parametrically. So if this flange ever updated, this flange would always go up and butt against it. So let's just use my extrude tool. I'm just going to hit the E on the keyboard, bring it up, and now we get options for to object, distance. These we don't have in flange yet. They will be coming shortly, but I could say I want to go up to object, select that face. It always errors out, don't worry. Just select that. And then you could even apply an offset. Let's say I want to go 0.1 inch. And there we go. It goes right up to that, just as I expected. The bad news about this one is if you saw that flange that I selected, let's unfold this real quick. It's going to follow that face that I selected. So unfold, select this guy, hit OK. Oh, collect all bends, hit OK. And if we look at this from a top view, it actually is at this weird angle. So if you're going to water jet this, unless you're willing to program a 5-axis water jet for this very simple part, you get this slight angled face. Don't worry, we have a quick way to fix it. I just create a sketch while I'm in this unfolded environment, project in this face. So just hit my P key on the keyboard, and it's just going to automatically project that in. And then we can just extrude a cut, grab that guy, and it's solved. Now we're back to just a simple 2.5 water jet part. So that's my first method. It's a couple extra steps because you got to unfold, then refold, then you get back in there. My next method is slightly magical, not as parametric though. So let's do, where am I? Sorry, wrong place in the timeline. So still same, you create that little flange, just put 0.1 or something super small. This time, I'm going to use the Move tool. So right-click, go to the Move and Copy. This has a ton of different options and so many use cases, the Move tool. But in this case, I'm a big fan of using faces. So select Faces. I'm going to pick this face. Watch out when you pick it. You see where it locks onto these points? Don't worry, I could always reset it later. So I'll do this on purpose and place it there for some reason. But you'll see once I start rotating, it's rotating about some arbitrary point where I clicked. So let's not do that. And what we could do is set the pivot. So I want to set the pivot at the bottom here. Hit the green check mark. Always remember that after you set your pivot. And then I could just click, drag, and be like, whoop, and pick how far I want this to go. Just type in an angle if I wanted to calculate that. It will combine again if you run it into the other geometry, but it's just another way to combine it. So one solution was parametric, one was direct. And then finally, we'll do a quick one here, is same kind of technique. Hit the extrude button, or the flange button. Oh, before I do that, most important part, will this thing flatten? Just always select this, hit flat pattern. Of course it will, you get the flat pattern correctly, perfect. So now what we want to do is I want to create a flange that's going to butt up against this. And this one I'm going to do parametrically. So again, I'll use my flange tool. Simple, there's basically just a flange demo, if you guys haven't seen the flange yet. And I'm going to do the same technique and bring it down here. We're going to say I want this to be 0 degrees and 0.1 is fine again. And you'll see it pushes that out there. And I want this actually go up to this face. But currently today we don't have an option of to object in the flange tool. So you could select this face actually, and it sometimes goes up to that face or point. I think I have to select something weird to make it work. But it won't be parametric. So what we can do is same exact idea, create that simple nub, use the extrude tool, and say I want this face go up distance to object. And by the way, it usually errors out when you do this to object automatically just because what it's doing is it's trying to find that face, but if you look, it extends past that face. So just always, don't worry, you try the second option as well to see if you get your result. In this case, it's trying to cut, it doesn't see geometry. And now this will be parametric to that flange. So now we could say, I want to flange this guy up again. Oh, that's a fillet tool, sorry. Flange up. And we'll just say I want that to be 1.5. Quickly create a sketch, project these guys in. Hit OK. Extrude, cut this, this, and this. And if we come in here and change the sketch, let's say we want this to be 3.5. Hit stop sketch. That flange will always be parametric to that other flange. So just remember to use different combinations. It gets better. So right now, I've been in the sheet metal workspace, but watch out, because some of these commands, you're like, I'm using a couple hotkeys, and it reaches in to other workspaces. So you have to jump back and forth, and some of them aren't actually exposed through the sheet metal tool, or the sheet metal toolbar. So actually what I want to do next, this is half of the side of this sheet metal part. We want to mirror it to the other side. So just remember that we still have modeling tools as well in the same exact environment. So I could jump into the modeling tools, say I want to mirror, just type in, search for that guy, say I want to mirror bodies this time. Select the face. I think I have a construction plane. Yeah, that guy. And hit OK. It mirrors it. Then we could come in here, combine it, and select those two bodies, and it combined those. So we just make sure to use all the tools you have, whether that be parametric, direct, patterning, mirroring, to really extend your sheet metal capabilities. And we're going to Patrick. So what I wanted to do next is create this complex vent thing in my sheet metal component. So I would have to like create this sketch, get into this crazy extrude. It would be hard, but don't worry, Patrick wrote an app for that as well. What number is he?
All right, am I on?
Yeah.
I am. All right. So you're gonna go super quick because we got almost no time left. I call this one Vinter. I see the theme. This one, usually all these things just happen because somebody says like, could you do that? And then like 2 weeks later, I come back with like no sleep, and it's like, I did it. And so this one is just for doing vents, so like something like this. There's like 3 different types in here I made. So as you could either do just like a quick way of generating it. You just pick a point in a sketch, and then it takes a little while to compute the circular one. So it does that, and you can adjust things like the radius or the number of hubs and then the number of spokes. Or you can do slots or rectangles and change little parameters like the number of them and things like that. You know, so you can make this like 8 or something. And then there's more of them. And then, yeah, no, medium. All right. While I have this one up, I was like, wanted to show one other thing because rule fillet is this really powerful tool that sometimes it's hard to figure out like when the right time to use it is. And this is the perfect example where you have something like this where you have all these edges and you're like, I want to fillet all of those inside edges but not the outside edges, and it's like, how do you pick? You don't want to have to sit here and pick every single one. So perfect example of rule fillet, and where I would say, what I want as my input is either going to be a feature or a face, and in this case, what I'm going to do, this was made by extruding a bunch of things and then combining them all together. So what I do is I'm going to pick the feature is going to be the last combine that combined them all together, because that's going to have like kind of the reference to all those faces. And then I'll say I want only, do you want like basically outside corners or inside corners? I'll say I only want fillets, and then let's just do something small like a 0.1, and then it puts the fillet on all the faces that I want fillets on, which is nice, because that would have been a lot of picking otherwise. All right, that's it. I'm done.
Awesome. All right, let's keep with pace. So I'm going to rip through a few tips and tricks in the Sculpt environment. So there's a couple that I want to show. Hopefully, for anyone that's using T-splines, working in the Sculpt workspace, it may be news to you. Hopefully not. If you grab an edge in the Sculpt workspace, you might be familiar with using edit form. Right? When you use edit form, you can basically drag or move geometry around in space, right? But in this case, what I want to do is not move that edge, but add another. If you hold Alt while in the Edit Form tool, it'll add another set of faces, right? So if you just hold Alt, you can continue to add more and more faces. That's not the tip. Hopefully everyone knows that one. The other thing that you can do is if you hold Alt and Command or Control on a PC, it will add another face, but it'll do it with a crease. So instead of, you saw every time that I added, I'll do it again really quickly. If I hold Alt, add another face, it'll do it with that transition or that blend in the corner. But if you hold Alt and Control, do the same thing, it does it with a sharp, right? It'll maintain a crease in there, so you don't have to go back in and then crease the edge afterwards and things like that.
Or Command on Mac.
Command on Mac, what did I say?
Both. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Command on Mac, Control on PC. All right, next. So the next thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is box mode, as we love to refer to it as. So inside of Fusion, if you look under the Utilities tab, go to, Display Mode, and you'll see there's 3 different modes that you can model in the Sculpt workspace. There's Box Mode, there's Smooth Mode, which is what you're seeing already, and then there's Control Frame, which shows actually both at the same time. So if you just grab a component, switch to Box Mode, it'll switch that geometry into its kind of cage representation, right? And you can still model with this, you can make changes. You can also switch that into the Control Frame mode, which shows the smooth geometry underneath, but also the cage representation on top of it. And the keyboard shortcut to doing this is Control on a Mac, Control 1, Control 2, and Control 3. So you can rip through those and jump back and forth really easily. Box mode is great to use when you're really trying to refine your geometry. And everything in smooth mode looks wonderful, but when you look at the box underneath it, you'll find out really quickly that it's not great geometry. You might have draft issues and things like that. Another thing that you can try, so people ask all the time, Sculpt is great, I can move things around and make melted ice cream. It's my second ice cream reference in the same session. But in this case, I want to lock those faces to a curve, right? I want to drive it by maybe a spline curve or something like that. So again, in the Sculpt workspace, go to Edit Form, and you'll see there's a tool in here called Object Snap. And what Object Snap allows you to do is snap an entity to a curve or another object or something like that, right? So it's a really nice way, if I wanted to match this profile, I can just grab all of these entities and kind of pull them and snap them to that curve, right? So I can get a little bit more control. Just do that by turning on Object Snaps. Next. I forget, so we're just going to check. Alt drag we talked about, smooth mode, box mode we talked about. Scale 0. So let's jump back over here. So another great tool or really kind of workflow in the Sculpt workspace. So if you're working with T-splines, you're frequently going to be deleting, manipulating faces. Sometimes they start to get out of control, right? Where they're very dramatic curves or faces in the geometry. So like in this example, I want to start making the front end of this saw, right? The part that goes out towards the blade. And what I'm going to do is just grab these faces, delete on the keyboard, which will remove them and give me an open edge loop that I can design with. But what I want to do here is, you can see this has a really kind of dynamic shape, right? It's maybe going to show, right? I might have kind of some bad geometry or bad surface there. I'm going to use just another little technique. I'm going to grab these faces, and I'm going to scale these edges to 0. And what that's going to do is do something crazy for a second there. We'll try that again. Actually, I'll pull it out maybe so it's a little bit easier for, turn off object snap. That was what happened there. It was trying to snap to some weird geometry in space. So you can see with this edge right here, it's kind of all over the place. But if I use the scale tool, if I scale it larger, it will get more dramatic. If I scale it to a value of 0, it'll flatten it out. Right? So now I have a nice kind of more uniform, flat, at least from that perspective, view. So we call that scale 0, do it all the time, and it's a really good one. One other quick one, shift select. So you'll find in the sculpt workspace, if you single click on a face, you'll grab the face. If you double click on a face, you grab the whole body. But if you click so let's say I wanted to grab the whole handle. If you click a face, hold shift, double click the next face, it'll grab the whole loop. Right? So it'll just continue to grab those faces until it terminates. So if I wanted to grab the inside here, click, shift, double click, it'll grab the whole loop. Right? So just a quick one that is super helpful. All right, I know we're running out of time. We talked about object snap. Let's talk about updating surface geometry with spline handles. So one thing that you'll see, all credit goes to Chad Lockhart on this one. So this is a really cool technique he just showed me recently that I love. So if you're used to kind of overbuilding parametric surfaces and driving them with curves, and maybe I just want to explore this shape, right? Whatever it is, I can grab my spline, move it, and it'll update, right? Which is nice. I can move it along that plane. But what I don't have access to is the control handle, right? So I can actually manipulate the curve. You don't have access to that when you're not in the sketch. So here's a fun little workaround. If we go in, and I'm just going to edit that sketch quickly. And all I'm going to do is come in here and I'm going to build a control handle, essentially, that I can drive this with. So if I were to grab, we'll do it really quickly. I'm going to do it with this curve right here in the interest of time. So if I grab this, edit the curve, all I'm going to do is build a control handle. Now, as Bryce mentioned before, you can see when I started to build that, it was picking up constraints out in space. So this is another good use case for holding command so that you don't lock any constraints. You don't want any constraints that you weren't looking for. And all you have to do is take this line and constrain it to the curve. So I'm going to say that it's a coincident constraint between the endpoints. And then I'm going to make a collinear constraint between the line and the control handle. And now when I leave this workspace, I have an extra line here, which is essentially my control handle, right? Yeah, super cool. So kudos to Chad on that one. It's a nice way to be able to drive that now out of the sketch. All right, so I know we are probably...
Yeah, we're running low on time.
We're going to rip through a couple of these lightning round
You guys
stuff.
can leave if you guys want to. It's lunch, but if you guys want to continue, we have ones in render, simulation, cam.
Good. No one's leaving. The door's locked anyway. You actually can't leave. So I'll go through a couple of these really quickly. So saving a rendering. So if you don't do this now in the render workspace, you can grab any rendering that you create, drag it over here into the rendering gallery, and it says render on save. This way, every time that you save a new version, it'll update that rendering for you. So if you're making changes to files and you don't want to have to then spend 20, 10, an hour, right? Whatever it takes to update the rendering, it'll update for you automatically. Replace materials. This is a pretty fun one. All you have to do in the dialog box is drag a new material, drop it on top of another one, and it'll replace it anywhere that it is in the model.
And this is great when you import SolidWorks or anything, because it comes in with 50 different grays.
Yeah, 50 shades of gray. You can replace them all pretty quickly by just dragging them on top of each other. This was new in a release. I don't know how much maybe everyone needs to know this, but it's super cool. In the spring, we added dielectric priority control. So what that does is it allows you to control the priority, dielectric materials or anything that doesn't conduct electricity, right? So basically everything that's not a metal object. And in these two examples, you can see the difference between the priority. In the glass down here, it's actually prioritizing rendering the liquid over the ice cubes. And in the nice rendering in the back, it's the opposite, right? It's rendering the glass first, it's rendering the ice in the bubbles, and then the liquid. And that's why you see the ice better, right? So it's just a nice way to be able to control those in the render workspace. Another one that I'll just talk about really quickly, because I don't think this is apparent to everybody, you'll find in the appearance dialog, there's my appearances and favorites. So favorites would be a great example if I'm working on, I don't know, a material and I want to be able to recall it later. I've tweaked the color, right? I made it, my brand color or something like that. If you right-click on a material, you can add it to favorites. If you right-click on a material, you can also copy it to my appearances, and that's cloud-based. So if I was to log in on Bryce's machine, I would see all of my appearances, not my favorites, right? So just keep in mind there's a difference between the two, and that's where you'd want to use it if you want to be able to access them later. Another one, I want to show this one really quickly because it shows well. Just talk quickly about lights and emissive materials. So inside of Fusion, hopefully you're familiar, we have material types that are light emitting, right? So there's not lights in the render workspace. You just have to make any object a light emitting material. So case in point, I have my Barcelona chair in this scene, and what I want to do, jump into the appearance dialog box, and I'm going to make the light bulb a light emitting material, right? So now when I render this out, and of course we're not going to wait for it to finish, but we'll just do a quick in-canvas render. You should see that the light coming from that light bulb is casting a shadow down on the ground. It's starting to light up the table and things like that. But it's also competing with the light of the environment, right? So that's why it's maybe washed out. You don't see it all that well. So a little tip and trick, if you jump into the scene settings dialog, in the environment tab, there is a value for how bright, or the value of the luminosity of the HDR environment. So case in point, if I took that from a value of 1,000 to 500, you'll see it's darker. And also, I'm going to switch this from solid color to the environment itself, right? So now my beautiful chair is sitting in a warehouse or something like that, but that's okay. If I were to take this down to a value of 0, now that light bulb is the only light emitting source in the scene, right? So that's how you get the difference between that light bulb is on, clearly you can see it, but it's not the only light source in the scene, right? So just control the environment for something like that. Another really quick one, none of these are as quick as I promised they are, but it's just my way of stopping you from leaving. So there's two really cool ones that I like. So hopefully you're familiar. If you haven't been doing it already, inside of Fusion 360, you can create a motion study. A motion study is a combination of joints, essentially. So I created some motion studies to make my little webcam rotate, and then it kind of turns back and oscillates and moves up and down, right? I'm not going to talk too much about motion studies because I like rendering better. You can take those motion studies and render them out. So if you're not doing it today, all you have to do is go into any rendering that you already create. So you have to create a rendering first, and then you can open it up and then re-render it as a motion study. You'll see it's the little box with the arrows underneath it, and then that will create a motion study. So the end result would look something like this, right? Where it's going to go through its kind of range of motion using those joints that I created before. Another one that I love, this is a nice way to, again, use the different workspaces as they work nicely together, is rigging up a light system, essentially. So you'll see I have a light emitting object. It's just this cylinder out here in space. And I'm going to jump in, and I've created a ball, right, or a sphere, I should say. This sphere, I applied air as a material, so it's completely transparent and won't show up in my renderings. And all I'm going to do is create a joint between the light that I created, my cylinder, and my ball. And then I'll just kind of pull it out here in space so it's at some distance that I want. And essentially, this is now a rigged. Oops, let me try that again. Oh, Bryce, I broke it. Oh, that's why. I just created a rigid joint, which is a revolute joint, which isn't going to do me any good. I'm going to make it a ball joint, and now that is like a light, right? I can move it around. And this works even nicer. It's a little slower, obviously, in the render workspace. Yeah, this is a great idea. This is also Chad. I'll give full props to Chad Lockhart on this one. But it's cool, right? I can move this around, hit render, move it around, hit render, and jump back and forth between those pretty quickly. So I'll turn it back to you, Bryce, if you want to talk a little bit about Cam.
Yeah, I only got a couple more. Feel free to walk out as you go.
Yeah, switch it. Yeah.
No, I'm good.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so last but not least, we're gonna jump into some cam. We have tons of other ones as well. This one's gonna be fairly quick. First one is probably my favorite while in the cam environment is you could select a bunch of toolpaths, right click and use the compare and edit toolbox. And it actually lists all the ones I had selected, all the parameters. And let's say I wanted to turn the coolant off, for instance. I could just type in coolant. I have a ton of different options. And just select them all, say, this one I could change here, and I could change them all here in this one, like Excel-like interface. It's only does it for the ones you have selected, so watch out. It is a little bit daunting when you're not filtering, because there's a lot of parameters in here, so make sure you just search on the right parameter. That's good. No, I don't want to update that. Next, we do a lot of parts that are the same kind of, we set up with the same exact tool paths. So what I would highly recommend is coming in here and creating templates. So you could select a group of tool paths once you figure out your basic parameters, and you could just right click, say create from template. I have a few that we just have for basic 3D strategies, 2D strategies, one with a ton of strategies. Well, in this case, we'll just say we want to grab 3D. A lot of the 3D toolpaths actually don't need a lot of selection, so it'll churn right through them. Some of the 2D toolpaths actually, you'll still have to go in and edit and select maybe heights, where the contour geometry is, but it gets you halfway there. The 80-20 rule, it gets you a lot of the way there. Final one I have for you guys, this one's, let me come up here and simulate this one, because we're way over on time, is there's a lot of things you could do in the simulation workspace, or the simulation tool set. Let me change this a little bit so it's not as daunting. Always have to have it the same way, if only remembered. So what you can do is you can actually, a couple different things. You could play on the timeline, and it'll go to that point in the simulation. But the main thing I really love doing is you can actually right-click here, go to the stock option, and you can actually load stock. You could save this stock out, and you could use this for different operations if you needed to. That's the last one that's very hidden, in my opinion, that it's kind of hard to find. But with that, all these actually mostly have videos online on our Fusion 360 YouTube channel. Some secret ones we came out with today, and Patrick's Sheeter will have one soon, as well as a ton of different how-tos videos on that. So they're all on YouTube. Go up, watch them. Thank you for coming today. If you guys have any questions, we'll be around to go through more quick tips as well. And have a great day, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, and for staying, we have chapstick because it's so dry in here. 360 chapstick. Oh.
Fusion chapstick.
Fusion 360 keeping us good here.